My wife ran off with my friend while I was laid off. They didn't know what I'd planned. I never expected to be sitting in my living room at 10:30 on a Tuesday morning, staring at a termination letter with 15 years of service reduced to a sterile paragraph about company restructuring. Apex Technologies had been my professional home since my early 30s. I'd risen through the ranks from junior developer to senior systems architect, building my life around the company's success. The layoffs came without warning. 117 employees, 23% of the workforce, were cut in a single day. I was employee number 74 to receive the news. "We value your contributions, Jack," said Melissa from HR, avoiding eye contact as she slid the severance package across her desk. "This isn't a reflection of your performance." I maintained my composure as I gathered my personal items. The family photo with Sarah at Yosemite. The MIT mug my mother had given me when I graduated. The small cactus that had somehow survived 15 years under fluorescent lighting. I nodded to colleagues as I walked out, some avoiding my gaze, others offering sympathetic glances. The drive home to our suburban Connecticut house was mechanical. I rehearsed how I would tell Sarah, calculating our financial runway with the severance package. 6 months if we were careful. The mortgage, her graduate school loans, the renovation we just completed on the kitchen. I pulled into our driveway, noticing Michael's car parked across the street. Michael Sullivan had been my friend since college. We'd been roommates at MIT, and he'd been best man at my wedding. He worked in finance in Boston but frequently visited on business. I was glad he was here. Perhaps he could help me network. The front door was unlocked. I could hear their voices in the kitchen, their laughter abruptly cutting off when I called out, "Sarah? I'm home early." There was a brief silence before I heard movement. Sarah appeared first, her expression shifting from surprise to something I couldn't quite place. Michael followed, his tie loosened, a glass of the Macallan I reserved for special occasions in his hand. "Jack," Sarah said, her voice carefully neutral. "What are you doing home?" The question hung in the air as I set my box of office belongings on the counter. I remember thinking how odd it was that this moment, telling my wife I'd lost my job, now seemed secondary to the peculiar tension in the room. "Layoffs," I said simply. "Apex cut 23% of staff today." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. Michael put his glass down and stepped forward, his hand extending in what I suppose was meant to be a sympathetic gesture. I noticed his shirt was untucked on one side. "Man, I'm sorry," he said. "That's rough." I nodded, moving past them to pour myself a drink. That was when I noticed 2 wine glasses on the coffee table in the living room. Sarah didn't drink wine in the afternoon. A detail, small but significant. One of many I would begin to catalog over the coming days. "How long have you been here?" I asked Michael, my tone conversational. "Just dropped by to go over some investment options with Sarah," he said. "Heard about a new tech startup that's promising." I nodded again, taking a sip of scotch, noting how Sarah couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Well," I said, "now I've got plenty of time to consider new investments." I didn't confront them that day, or the next. Instead, I began a careful, methodical observation of patterns I'd been too busy to notice before. The late-night texts, Sarah's sudden interest in fitness with a new gym schedule that never seemed to result in workout clothes needing washing. The weekend study groups for her MBA program that couldn't be verified on any syllabus. I was, after all, trained to recognize patterns in systems. Now I was simply applying that skill to my personal life. The job search proved more challenging than I had anticipated. At 47, I found myself in an uncomfortable middle ground, overqualified for many positions, but facing unspoken age bias for others. Each rejection email arrived with the same corporate platitudes about moving forward with candidates whose qualifications better match our current needs. Meanwhile, the evidence of Sarah and Michael's affair accumulated. A receipt for a hotel in Boston fell from her coat pocket. An unfamiliar cologne lingered on her clothes. The decrease in intimacy between us had been gradual over years, but now felt deliberate and complete. 1 month after my layoff, I was in our home office reviewing job listings when I discovered the email. Sarah had left her laptop open, her Gmail visible on the screen. I hadn't been looking for evidence. I'd already found enough. But there it was. A detailed exchange between her and Michael discussing their future together. Plans made while I searched for employment. Calculations of when would be the opportune time to leave. "He's going to burn through the severance soon," Michael had written. "Better to make the break before things get desperate. You deserve better than watching him spiral." Sarah's reply was equally pragmatic. "I've put in 15 years. I'm not leaving empty-handed." I closed the laptop and sat in perfect stillness for 23 minutes. I know because I watched the clock, focusing on my breathing, calculating variables, considering options. The business analyst in me separated emotion from strategy. That evening, when Sarah returned from her study group, I prepared dinner as usual. We ate in relative silence, the type that had become our norm. When she mentioned Michael had been offered a position with his firm's San Francisco office, I nodded with interest. "Good opportunity for him," I said, refilling my water glass. "He's considering it," she replied, studying my reaction. I maintained an expression of mild interest. California's expensive, but the tech scene there is vibrant. 2 more weeks passed. My severance continued to dwindle. I maintained a visible routine of job applications and networking calls. But privately, I had begun something else entirely. During my years at Apex, I developed a concept for a natural language processing algorithm that could predict market fluctuations by analyzing communication patterns within industries. The company had deemed it too speculative to pursue. Now, without the constraints of corporate priorities, I dedicated my nights to developing it. Our home office became my sanctuary from midnight until dawn. Sarah never inquired about what kept me working late. Her assumption of my professional decline provided perfect cover for my actual work. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, exactly 7 weeks after my layoff, Sarah and Michael finally revealed their intentions. They sat me down in our living room, expressions carefully arranged to convey regretful determination. "Jack," Sarah began, "we need to talk." I set aside the laptop where I'd been working on a job application. "I'm listening." "This isn't working anymore," she continued. It hasn't been for a long time, and I think we both know it." I nodded slowly, allowing her to continue. "Michael and I." She glanced at him, drawing strength from his presence. "We've developed feelings for each other." The revelation hung in the air between us. Not a surprise, but now an acknowledged reality. "I see," I said simply. "I'm sorry, man," Michael added, his tone suggesting this was an unfortunate but inevitable development. "We never meant for this to happen." I studied them both, noting the subtle indicators of their relief at my calm reaction. They had expected anger, perhaps desperation. "Michael's taking the position in San Francisco," Sarah continued. "I'm going with him." "When?" I asked, my voice steady. 2 weeks, Michael answered. "My firm is covering relocation costs." I nodded again, processing this information as if it were simply another variable in an equation. "What about the house?" I asked. Sarah had clearly prepared for this question. "We can sell it and split the proceeds. Your name is on the mortgage, but realistically, Jack, with your employment situation." She left the implication hanging. I couldn't afford to keep it. "I understand," I said, rising from my seat. "I appreciate your honesty." Their surprise at my composure was evident. They had anticipated recriminations, perhaps bargaining. My calm acceptance disrupted their narrative. "You're not upset?" Sarah asked, uncertainty creeping into her voice. I considered the question carefully before answering. 15 years is a significant investment, I said finally. But sunk costs shouldn't determine future decisions. That's just basic economics. I left them in the living room, confused by my response. As I closed the door to the home office, I smiled for the first time that day. The prototype for my algorithm was showing promising results in its initial testing phase. The departure of Sarah and Michael proceeded according to their timeline. I helped pack boxes, arranged for movers, and maintained cordial relations throughout. My apparent acceptance of the situation seemed to unsettle them more than anger would have. Twice I caught Sarah studying me with a mixture of confusion and, perhaps, disappointment. "You're taking this very well," she remarked 3 days before their scheduled departure. I shrugged, labeling another box of her books. "What would be the point of making this more difficult?" She hesitated before responding. I expected, more of a reaction. I set down the marker and looked at her directly. "Would that change your decision?" "No," she admitted. "Then I'm choosing to focus my energy elsewhere." The truth was, I was channeling all my analytical capability and emotional energy into my project. While they prepared for their new life in California, I was preparing for something entirely different. The algorithm I developed was performing beyond my initial projections. By analyzing communication patterns across industry publications, social media, and financial reporting, it could predict market movements with 78% accuracy 3 days in advance, a significant edge in the financial technology sector. 2 days after Sarah and Michael left for San Francisco, I secured a meeting with Vertex Ventures, a mid-sized investment firm specializing in financial technology. The meeting had been arranged through an old classmate from MIT who had seen potential in my preliminary white paper. The presentation was scheduled for 10 a.m. I arrived at 9:15, reviewed my materials, and calibrated my expectations. Best case: seed funding to develop a full implementation. Worst case: valuable feedback to refine my approach. What happened exceeded even my optimistic projections. "This isn't just an algorithm," said Catherine Chun, Vertex's Chief Innovation Officer, after my demonstration. "This is a paradigm shift in predictive analytics." By 2 p.m., we were discussing acquisition terms rather than investment parameters. By 5 p.m., preliminary paperwork was being drafted. By the end of the week, I had an offer, $4.7 million for the intellectual property, with an additional $3 million in performance-based incentives, plus a 3-year contract as lead architect at $225,000 annually. I signed the papers on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 months after being laid off from Apex. That evening, I sat alone in my home office, now emptied of most of my equipment which had been relocated to Vertex's development lab. The house felt different, not empty, but unburdened. I poured a glass of the Macallan and contemplated the irony of the situation. The layoff that Sarah and Michael had perceived as my downfall had created the opportunity for my innovation to thrive. Their departure, intended as an escape from what they saw as a sinking ship, had occurred just weeks before that ship transformed into a yacht. I had not yet decided what to do about the house. With the acquisition payment, I could maintain it easily, but it held memories I wasn't certain I wanted to preserve. The practical solution would be to sell it and relocate closer to Vertex's offices. As I considered these options, my phone buzzed with a text from Elaine, a data scientist I'd met during my final year at Apex. We'd maintained a professional friendship, occasionally meeting for coffee to discuss industry developments. She had been supportive during my unemployment, offering constructive feedback on my algorithm when few others showed interest. Heard about the Vertex deal. Very impressive. Coffee tomorrow to celebrate. I found myself smiling as I responded affirmatively. Elaine's interest had always been in the work itself, not in what it could provide. Her validation came from recognizing the innovation, not its financial outcome. The contrast with Sarah could not have been more stark. The news of my success with Vertex spread quickly through professional circles. LinkedIn connections who had been conspicuously silent during my unemployment suddenly reappeared with congratulatory messages. Former Apex colleagues reached out about opportunities. Industry publications requested interviews about the revolutionary predictive analytics paradigm. I approached this attention with the same methodical analysis I applied to everything else. Each interaction was evaluated for its strategic value, each opportunity assessed for its alignment with my objectives. 6 weeks after the acquisition, the first message from Sarah arrived in my inbox. "Jack, I've been hearing about your success. I'm genuinely happy for you. Perhaps we could talk sometime? There are things I'd like to explain." I read the message 3 times, analyzing its components like data points. The timing correlated with public announcements about the acquisition. The tone calibrated to suggest sincerity while opening a door. The implicit invitation to reconsider past decisions in light of new circumstances. I did not respond immediately. Instead, I continued with my new routine. Mornings at Vertex's development lab, afternoons consulting with implementation teams, evenings often spent with Elaine, whose intellectual partnership had evolved into something more meaningful. 1 month after Sarah's email, a second message arrived, this time from Michael. Jack, I know we left things in a difficult place. I've been following your work with Vertex, truly groundbreaking stuff. Sarah and I have been talking, and we both feel terrible about how everything happened. The timing was unfortunate. If you're open to it, I'd value the chance to clear the air. There might even be opportunities for collaboration now that I'm working with tech clients here in SF. Again, I analyzed the message dispassionately. The acknowledgement of unfortunate timing, rather than acknowledging the affair itself. The pivot to professional opportunities, suggesting that my new financial status had elevated me to potential partner rather than discarded friend. That evening, I discussed both messages with Elaine as we prepared dinner in my kitchen. She listened carefully, her analytical mind processing the situation without the emotional entanglements that might have clouded my judgment. What would be the value proposition in responding? She asked finally, the question framed precisely in terms that resonated with my thinking. I considered this as I chopped vegetables. Closure, perhaps. Validation. Those are emotional returns, she noted. Are they sufficient to justify the investment of your time and mental energy? I smiled at her framing of the question. This was why our connection worked. We spoke the same language of careful analysis, even about personal matters. No, I decided. The expected return doesn't justify the investment. The next morning, I composed brief, courteous replies to both Sarah and Michael. To Sarah, thank you for your message. I'm doing well and hope you are too. I don't see value in revisiting the past. To Michael, I appreciate the outreach. My schedule is currently focused on implementation at Vertex. I wish you success with your clients. With those messages sent, I completed the paperwork to put the Connecticut house on the market and made an offer on a modern apartment closer to Vertex's headquarters. The real estate agent suggested staging the house for better offers, removing personal items that might distract potential buyers. I agreed, spending one final weekend boxing 15 years of shared history. Photos, wedding gifts, holiday souvenirs, each item cataloged and assessed for its utility in my new life. Those without practical value were donated or discarded. 3 days later, as I handed the keys to the real estate agent, I realized I felt neither regret nor sadness. The house, like my marriage, had been a system that had run its course. The efficient response was not to mourn its obsolescence, but to implement a more effective replacement. Later that week, as Elaine and I settled into dinner at a small restaurant near my new apartment, she asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Apex hadn't laid you off?" I considered the question with the thoroughness it deserved. The layoff was a necessary variable, I concluded. Without it, the algorithm would have remained a theoretical concept. My marriage would have continued its inefficient operation, and I wouldn't be here with you, which would be a suboptimal outcome. She laughed, the sound genuine and warm. Only you could make romantic sentiment sound like a systems analysis. I smiled in return. Accurate analysis leads to optimal results. My current circumstances are evidence of that principle. As we continued our dinner, I reflected on the unexpected algorithm of my personal life. The inputs, a layoff, a betrayal, had seemed catastrophic. Yet the output had yielded a more efficient system, both professionally and personally. The process had been painful but necessary for optimization. Sarah and Michael had made their calculations based on incomplete data. They had seen only the immediate variables, my unemployment, their attraction, without accounting for the unseen potential that was developing in parallel. Their equation had failed to include the most critical factor, resilience expressed through innovation. In the end, the title of this chapter in my life wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was simply about accurate analysis leading to superior outcomes. They hadn't known what I'd planned because I hadn't planned it at all. I had merely recognized opportunity in adversity and calculated the optimal response. Some might call it karma. I call it efficient system recalibration. The house sold for 27% above asking price 3 weeks later. I didn't tell Sarah.